This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khanam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, we have a really great show today. First, we need to send out our condolences, obviously, to the people who died in Egypt today. A number of individuals actually burned to death in a Coptic church in Egypt, and our condolences go to the Coptic Egyptian community there and here. But we have a great show today. We're going to be talking about a number of things related to Saudi Arabia, right? In case you guys didn't catch it, Saudi Arabia Aramco company announced one of the largest profits like in their history. It jumped 90% as a result of it, really high crude oil prices. And their profits just for the half year exceeded $88 billion. This is going to the pockets of MBS, and we're going to talk about some of the implications of that. In addition, Saudi Arabia, one of its leading billionaires, Prince Alwaleed Bin Talal, invested $500 million in three major Russian companies just as the Ukrainian invasion began. Isn't that interesting? We're going to talk about some of the implications on that. And of course, we have to talk about the breaking news with former President Donald Trump having his Mar-a-Lago estate raided for classified information. And the question in front of us is who ratted on him? I think it's either Jared Kushner or his daughter, but we'll see. But before we get to all of that, Jamal, we're going to see an interview that you did with Amr El-Bayoumi. He's an Egyptian-American actor and filmmaker and professor and international lawyer. He's going to discuss his recent article in Arab America entitled Amr Goes to Hollywood, an actor's perspective on hateful Arab and Muslim stereotypes and narratives. It's a really great interview, and it's very topical.
So let's watch Amr El-Bayoumi. A picture is worth 1,000 words, thus the negative stereotypes and degrading images used to portray minorities in films are a powerful agent in shaping the public's distorted perception of them. These hateful and reductive film characters then persist in the spectator's mind and influence his or her perception of the minority in society. Thus, it plays a significant role in devaluing and dehumanizing members of these groups. Joining us on Arab Talk this week is Amr El-Bayoumi. In his recent article in Arab America, Amr Goes to Hollywood, an actor's perspective on hateful Arab and Muslim stereotypes and narratives, he details how, despite some progress in reducing such stereotypes in Hollywood, there is still much work to be done. He lists several persistent toxic roles representing Arab and Muslims in films today. Mr. El-Bayoumi is an Egyptian-American actor, filmmaker, professor, and international lawyer based in Washington, D.C. He has given numerous presentations on Arab and Muslim stereotypes, including a panel discussion with the SAG-AFTRA, the National Screen Actors Union. Welcome to Arab Talk, Amr.
Thank you very much for having me, Jamal. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to having an interesting and informative discussion for your listeners.
First, let me begin by thanking you for writing this article. It really brought back memories of my discussion with the late Jack Shaheen about his book, Real Bad Arabs, which is still very valid today. Tell us about your career as an actor and your first encounter with stereotyping on a personal basis.
On a personal basis, it started when I was just out of college. I was actually working as an engineer in Los Angeles and already getting ready to go to law school at Georgetown. And being in LA and having that bug of acting since I was a young child, I decided to have some fun those last few months before I went to law school and started to audition for different small roles just to pass the time. And that first experience was in 1990, where there was a casting for extras in a feature film about an archaeologist in Egypt. And I went not thinking much about the stereotypes that I've already been exposed to throughout the 70s and 80s, and just assuming this would be a fun role to have. And lo and behold, it was your typical racist production. The superior white European archaeologist bossing around the ignorant and subservient workers at the archaeological site, speaking ooga booga gibberish and being bossed around. And I got dressed up in some quote unquote traditional Arab garb that doesn't resemble anything I had ever seen in my lifetime in any Arab country. And we were told to go into the cave, and we were afraid because we think it's cursed. So he offers us $100 to go in. The first person to get in the cave and excavate it will get $100. I walked off the set. I just talked to the producer. I said, I cannot do this. This is just a demeaning of my people. I come from a very rich culture in Egypt with 7,000 years of history. Why this little slice of depiction of our people? So that was my first experience. And then I had a long career as a lawyer, but always had the desire to become an actor. And 10 years ago, I stopped being a lawyer and studied acting in London, and I've been acting ever since. And I also teach acting at the university here in Virginia. So it's been a great passion of mine, not for fame and fortune, and being well aware of these stereotypes. And that's really what compelled me to write the article for Arab America, which is based on a 23-page paper that I wrote. Was I really wanted to document the origin of stereotypes generally, from the Jewish Shylock to the African-American pimp or maid, or the incomprehensible Asian American, or the bloodthirsty Native American. And of course, as you mentioned, well documented by the late Dr. Shaheen, who was a dear friend, in-depth chronological analysis of the origin of these stereotypes, starting with the romanticized, exoticized Valentino character, to the subservient middle person serving the French colonists or the British colonists, to the modern day straight terrorist. And I really wanted to lay out the kind of different subtleties of these stereotypes. There are plenty of the blatant, shameless, one-dimensional Arab and Muslim stereotypes as terrorist, and that's clearly depicted in Dr. Shaheen's work. What I was really after in this paper is to show some of the trends, and based on my own experience, not in taking these roles, but being offered these roles, and kind of keeping track over the last 10 years. And it's really come down to that straight terrorist. And then the new trend I've noticed is making an element of humanization to the terrorist. I'll give you an example here of giving a bit of a personal touch to the terrorists. They're fully terrorists. They want to destroy Western civilization violently and brutally. And yet in this recent audition that I was submitted, it's for a show called Lioness, and the executive producer is Nicole Kidman. And it's a series, and the character is described as a rags to riches billionaire businessman with ties to terrorism, rationalizes death and destruction and bloodshed in the name of honor and love for his family, cherishing no one above his darling daughter. So we get that quote unquote humanization that, oh, he wants to destroy the world, but he's got a soft spot for his daughter. This is the purported balance we are seeing in these characters now.
Well, that's actually, I was going to ask you about that. From when you began acting to now, to the year 2022, do you think that the film industry is more open to discussion about what members of different groups find offensive?
I think they've shown the effort to give the impression that they're doing that, but the net result is just seeing this example I just gave you. I always say that a lot of casting directors put a statement that they're committed to diversity in casting. I think in my experience, it's more they're committed to giving the impression that they are committed to diversity in casting. I'm not going to deny that there are some good roles that have come out. We have the show Rami, by a very popular show. We have Arab actors playing common people, such as Tony Shalhoub in The Marvelous Miss Maisel. All excellent. Alia Shaukat, I believe of Iraqi origin, doing mainstream roles. However, the pervasive negative image is strong and alive and well. And again, we see another tactic that's been used that was really highlighted in a book by Professor Evelyn Sultani at University of Southern California. This other attempt to balance the character by having the bad Arab, and yet we have the good Arab. For example, in the show FBI, one of the agents is a good Muslim. It's a very dangerous approach because it gives the illusion of balance. And nevertheless, the context is Arabs and violence. There aren't any other context. The thousands of other narratives that can be explored with Arab and Muslim characters is still ignored. It is about violence, and that's in our blood, and that is in our root. And we will compromise and take one of the good ones and have them on our side, but the context is still the same.
Does the Screen Actors Guild have influence over what constitutes offensive minority stereotypes in films? I mean, do you have do they try to do something about it?
Well, I mean, we have this talk that you referenced and awareness and everything, but that's really what motivated me to write this article. Is it's not changing much, and I wanted to define those things that give the illusion that it's changing, and yet the fundamentals are still there. And it cannot be denied that dehumanizing people generally, and the objective of that, it is a chicken and egg kind of relationship. When you oppress people, you need to dehumanize them. That's the only mechanism that can work. And through the strength of film and TV, that's a mechanism that's been used to rationalize the massacre of the Native Americans. That's been used to rationalize the occupation of Palestine by Israeli forces. And it's just undeniable that it will go hand in hand. You cannot have Secretary of State Madeleine Albright speaking on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl in 1996. And when she's asked the question, assuming it's true that 500,000 Iraqi children died as a direct result of these sanctions, is the price worth it? Well, Leslie, that's a tough question, but I would say yes, basically, and apparently regretted it years later after dying. But how can you possibly say this about any people? Fill in the blank instead of Iraqi, say Spaniards, say Jews, say anything. It is deplorable. And the only way this statement can go and be said and justified and rationalized is you have to first give the sense to people that these people are lesser. And when you depict them as uncivilized and violent consistently, this is the direct result. So it goes hand in hand with the policies that lead to a Muslim ban, the invasion of Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. So it's a very toxic mix. So back to your question again, yes, I would encourage the union to be more proactive in finding real solutions to this rather than this marginalization and atomization of the issue through these tactics that I've given examples of.
Do you think that there is a hidden agenda behind these stereotypes? Is it less a case of ignorance and insensitivity and more one of a deliberate desire to influence public perception of a particular group?
Jamal, I think it's absolutely deliberate. I don't think it's ignorance. It kind of is played off as, oh, it's just a joke, or this is harmless, it's fiction. These are very real results that result in death and invasion and billions of dollars being spent to occupy Afghanistan in the name of liberation or democratization of a country. You have marginalized these people consistently. And this goes hand in hand, the propaganda that goes with it. And what I also noted in my article is the extent to which we don't hear certain narratives. For example, I gave the example of the Kite Runner. There's a Broadway play now in New York based on the book and then the film by Khalid Hosseini. And I did not choose to audition for that. I was asked to. It is not a blatant racist stereotype per se, but the idea that after 20 years of the US government with our tax dollars occupying Afghanistan, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of people, and basically turning it into a multi-trillion-dollar junket for the military-industrial complex, the coincidence that we are seeing a piece that depicts the brutality of the Russian invasion and the brutality of the Taliban leadership prior to our occupation is very interesting. Why are we not hearing the story about the US occupation of Afghanistan? So those choices are deliberate, and what you do see and how you see it and what you don't see are deliberate choices.
What about casting? I mean, there's an argument that's made that also non-Arabs are casted to play the role of Arabs or the role of Muslims, etc. But then others make the same argument, well, you know, the white man in this country, as in the old Western movies, always played the indigenous natives here and so forth. So that's, but you see there's roles, or just give you a recent example, the casting of Gal Gadot to play Cleopatra, you know, an Egyptian queen, you know, how does that bode with you?
It doesn't bode well because it's all part and parcel of the same thing. We are narrowed down into these ugly images, and we can't even portray our own stories, such as Aladdin or Gods of Egypt. And there's been several reports on that, and where the producers regretted not casting Arabs in the roles. So we can't play our own good roles, or we're not depicted at all. There was a study here in by USC Annenberg. It's called Missing and Maligned, the Reality of Muslims in Popular Global Movies, saying how disproportionately minuscule number of Arab and Muslim characters compared to their representation in the world population in films. So that's really the deliberate choice, which is either not to present, you don't exist, or you exist in this distorted format that we define. So that's very evident in that. It's just like you have the phrase when the founding of Israel by the Zionist propaganda was, it's a land without a people for a people without a land. Palestinians just don't exist. And if they do exist, they're cockroaches, vermin, violent, etc. So again, going back to your initial point about whether this is deliberate or not, I mean, I'll give you an example of, I was making a film about stereotypes in 2004, and I looked up the word Arab on dictionary.com in the thesaurus section. Here is the definition: bum, derelict, ragamuffin, tramp, wow, traveler, urchin, vagabond, vendor. This is in the fabric of how we define these images. So that's it. You are either non-existent or you are through this distorted lens. And it's very unfortunate. And what to do about it? Raise awareness and tell our own stories.
I mean, that's a good point to make, because I was going to mention, you know, what does it take to make a significant inroads? For example, I recall in 2015, you know, they have the hashtag Oscars So White. You know, when they had that hashtag, resulted in what appears to be a sea change in the nomination of more people of color. I mean, does it take something like this to call out stereotyping of Arab Americans?
Of course, it's an ongoing fight. I mean, you look at the work of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee has been fighting these ugly stereotypes for decades, the work of Jack Shaheen, exposing it and offering alternatives by making our own work. I'm not going to sit and wait for Hollywood to wake up. It is a business. It thrives on these ugly stereotypes for decades, be it whatever marginalized group, anyone but a white Protestant male, it seems like, has been consistently depicted in a negative fashion. So it's just a matter of making our own work, creating our own stories. And every time I give a lecture and have young students ask me, how do I make a film that will sell in Hollywood? I tell them, don't. And then I tell them about Professor Haile Garima, who's also an independent filmmaker here in Washington, D.C., says you have no excuse not to tell your own story. So it's a long process, but I think it's a double-barreled approach, attacking and exposing these depictions while also telling other stories. I mean, it's unlimited. It's just.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you walked off the set. How many examples of this? I mean, how many Arab Americans have done that? Or is it like really, I mean, I understand the financial limitations. Somebody gets a role and then they want to hold on to their job, and then they see themselves playing this stereotype and they still go along with it.
And I don't judge some of my colleagues. I mean, I worked as a lawyer and was able to pay off my debt after a couple decades of hard work. And again, I rely on acting as my income now. So there are choices and sacrifices I make. But I do understand some who just say I have to work. In a recent documentary about Rita Moreno, she was on contract with one of the major studios, and she played typically racist roles with brown face regularly, and just said, hey, that's the way it was. I had to work. I'm not going to judge that. It's the system that is rotten. And to sit here and focus on individuals and criticizing their choices is not what I'm after here. I am after raising awareness of this rotten system and dispelling it. So it is a tough choice for many. I've turned down quite a bit of money for roles that I just could not in good conscience take. So it's all personal choices. But again, it's a tough road to follow. You know, the argument is sometimes made, well, you have to work within the system to change the system, which to me is a very dangerous way of looking at the world. I doubt you're going to change much by reinforcing these racist and ugly images of Arabs. You're just reinforcing it.
What about the successes or the inroads that we've been making? You know, we've talked about Rami Malek, you know, Oscar winner, and other shows now by Arab Americans, Egyptian, Lebanese, and Palestinians, and actually several nominations. Do you think that kind of the more we produce and create results? I mean, after all, I mean, you're Egyptian American. That's the best cinema in the entire Arab world comes out of Egypt, and will that kind of change probably the direction that Hollywood takes when people start to rise in stardom?
I think it's ignoring the background that we were talking about earlier, the interconnection between US foreign policy and these images. So long as there's this inconsistent standard as to human rights, where human rights is viewed as a salad bar, you kind of pick and choose what you like and you don't take what you don't like. Having a consistent standard under international law and treating all human beings as equal with the right to dignity and basic human rights. That's the starting point. And so long as you have those inconsistencies, you're going to have these stereotypes and these misrepresentations or non-representations. So yes, I acknowledge some progress. You have a new, I believe it's a Marvel character who's a Pakistani Muslim. All good stuff. But again, you look at that compared to the volume we see, it's minuscule, and not enough is being changed. So continue fighting, continue exposing it.
Well, we're seeing it in real time. I mean, we can cite what's happening today with the Russian war on Ukraine, and then what happens in Palestine, you know, and journalists saying these look like us, they have blonde hair and blue eyes, and exactly. I'm sure you're aware of this. So if that comes out from our intellectuals and journalists, I can't imagine what happens in Hollywood.
Oh yeah, in the mainstream, I think it's a perfect example, Jamal. I mean, so Ukraine, I mean, do you denounce international use of force illegally in any context, or you say, okay, these people look like us and that, and it's really particularly telling. I think a colleague, Mustafa Bayoumi, wrote a very good piece in The Guardian about that inconsistency, that Ukraine has a priority, but Yemen, people are being slaughtered every day, or Iraq or Afghanistan, Libya, Haiti, you name the place where there are people of color that are not considered as superior. Therefore, it is not important. And it's really glaring at this point what you see with the coverage of Ukraine. Be consistent, denounce the use of force, the violation of international law and international human rights consistently, or don't, because it's this selectivity smacks of bias and racism.
Amr El-Bayoumi, thank you for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. It was a pleasure.
That's the voice and the face of Amr El-Bayoumi. He's an actor talking about really, intensive, even in this day, I shouldn't say even in this day, but especially in this day, Jamal, of Arab and Muslim negative stereotypes being directed and kind of engaged with in Hollywood still, Jamal. So there really hasn't been any let up. In fact, according to Amr, maybe it's gotten a little worse.
Well, that's the problem. It has not improved. And, I'm sure you've studied Real Bad Arabs, the book by the late Jack Shaheen, who documented and investigated and chastised and had meetings and consulted with Hollywood producers trying to kind of change their attitude and their stereotyping, apparently to no avail. Maybe a little bit of improvement, but not according to Amr, who is an actor. So aside from him being a lawyer, but he's also, that's his passion, acting. And he encountered it himself, including refusing, even after he was casted and hired, refusing to act in certain films. One that I recall from the interview is Death on the Nile, or the remake of Death on the Nile with Gal Gadot. Now, and again, here they go again. It's just like when they hire an Arab American, they want them to act like stupid or subservient,
or a terrorist,
or ignorant, and what have you. And mentioning Gal Gadot, which is the kind of the funny thing, she's going to be acting in a new film as Cleopatra.
So you have an Israeli, being able to depict themselves, or depicting themselves as Cleopatra, the infamous Egyptian queen. So I don't think it's gotten better, Jamal. I don't see how it's gotten better. It's gotten worse.
There are a few things, so you kind of tend to think, well, maybe it has gotten better.
But what's better? What's better?
People might cite Rami Malek, famous Egyptian American actor.
Yeah, but his character was
an Oscar.
But his character was not as an Arab. His character was
no, but regardless, it's to say, like, here he is in the movies and he got honored and an Oscar, and then you have the comedian Rami, the other Rami with a series on Hulu and other things that you see. Maybe there are several films, that got nominated for Oscars, including Palestinian films. But this is kind of like scratching the surface, and the discrimination and the vilification of Arabs continues in Hollywood. And also, I think there's a major problem with casting, like, other people playing the roles, the same problems that Latinos have faced, African Americans, and also definitely Native Americans, who, if you recall, always were vilified and played by white people. They weren't even,
that's exactly right. No, that's exactly right, Jamal. This is not just an Arab American problem. It's a disenfranchised people of color problem in the United States. I mean, just recently, James Franco was slated to play Fidel Castro in a big movie upcoming, and they neglected hundreds of Latino actors for that role, and in fact decided to go with James Franco instead. So, and Gal Gadot playing Cleopatra is yet another example. And so, I think you could make the argument that despite these crumbs that are being thrown around with Rami Malek or Rami the comedian, things are actually in some ways a lot worse.
Rami Youssef.
Rami Youssef. Yeah. But things are actually much worse for disenfranchised communities in this country with respect to Hollywood right now in terms of representation. I don't see it getting better.
No, and that's exactly what Mr. El-Bayoum's article is all about, and his argument, making the argument that despite some progress, as was mentioned, in reducing such stereotypes in Hollywood, there is still much work to be done. And he goes on with a whole list of several persistent toxic roles representing Arabs and Muslims in films today. Moving on, Jess, and this is something we talked about. We warned about, and we said, who's profiteering, who's making the money because of this Russian-Ukrainian war, and
it's the Saudis
and the embargo or the sanctions on Russian gas and oil, and of course we mentioned how the Europeans are suffering and telling. Which is the strongest economically country in Europe, Germany, telling its citizens to take less showers so they don't consume a lot of gas and so forth. And who's making the money? We named it, aside from the United States, aside from oil companies here, not a mystery, Saudi Arabia. So
I mean, the profits are astronomical, Jamal. Astronomical profits for the Saudi regime. Astronomical.
Yeah. So Aramco, this is just, I guess, published its financial statement on Sunday, showed that its profits jumped 90% in the second quarter compared to the same time last year, earning it nearly $88 billion. And
that's just for a quarter, Jamal. That's
exactly,
just one quarter.
Exactly. So even the company itself credited the jump to higher crude oil prices. Well, we know why they have higher crude oil prices and more volume, and they still say that Saudi Arabia vast oil reserves are among the cheapest to produce in the world. So of course, if you get Saudi oil compared to other countries where they have to dig deeper and spend more money, the Saudis make more money. So it's
this plays
astounding,
into
just that people couldn't figure this out, and then yet you have people complaining and want to prolong the war. That's the sad thing about it. And it really surprises me, not just like the United States efforts and through its own geopolitical ambition to see this war continue, to confront Russia and Putin.
Right.
But also the Europeans are paying the heaviest price so far, and then of course other countries, and the Saudis are ringing that cash register.
Well, that's exactly right, Jamal. Well, first of all, the Ukrainians are paying the biggest price for this, and then after that, you have European countries, and then you have any other country that basically needs crude oil to keep their economy going, or food, because of the food and the grain exports that are being only within this last week slowly being released. But from a larger geopolitical perspective, Jamal, when we're talking about who benefits, we're looking at a medieval kingdom, which is putting tremendous pressure on the United States, on President Biden, disrespecting basically Biden's recent visit to kiss the ring of MBS. And we kind of know why MBS has the upper hand. I mean, he has the upper hand because he singularly, because he runs the country, there's no doubt about it, has his finger and pulse on the largest oil reserves in the world. $88 billion, Jamal, for one quarter puts the Saudi regime just do the math, for almost, $500 billion in profit for the year coming up. It's an extraordinary amount of money.
They're paying their dividends to shareholders of $18.8 billion just for that quarter alone.
Just the dividends. So does this strengthen the hand of the rogue regime? Absolutely. Absolutely it does. But we see, if we dig even a little bit further, we have to look at Bin Talal, Prince Alwaleed. How the heck is Prince Walid investing $500 million in Russian companies just before the invasion?
So according to the findings, and this is, we should mention, his company is Saudi Arabia's Kingdom Holding. That's the name of the company, the investment firm controlled by the billionaire Prince Alwaleed Bin Talal. Quietly, this has just came up now, quietly invested more than $500 million just in 3 major Russian energy companies between February and March. Look at the timing between February and March. This is according to regulatory filings showed. They invested in Gazprom, they invested in Rosneft and Lukoil, and those are Russia's largest gas and oil companies. And $500 million, as you said.
Yeah, but he bought it. He invested at a time when they were getting slammed and were at the lowest price. And now we see that the price of oil and gas has gone up tremendously. We see so far the Russian economy has been able to withstand, although with difficulty, withstand the economic sanctions put on them by the United States and by the EU. So it looks like Prince Talal, Jamal, made an economic, very smart move. Smart move.
That's called war profiteering. But think about this. You have OPEC, right? We know what OPEC is all about, but there is the OPEC Plus group.
OPEC Plus, of which Russia is a member.
Exactly. Saudi Arabia and Russia lead the OPEC Plus group. They're the largest holdings of that alliance, which was formed in 2017 between OPEC and organization and other allied producers. And here, supposedly, Saudi Arabia, after Israel, and it's our biggest ally, in the Middle East, Biden goes to 2 countries. He goes to Israel, he goes to Saudi Arabia. And here are the Saudis cooperating with the Russians, investing in Russian oil companies. They're making money with the Russians. And sadly, Biden went there to beg them to produce more oil to help reduce gas prices at the pump for Americans.
Yeah, Jamal, and the story gets even more complicated. And I'm going to throw another curveball into the kind of submissive position of the United States and President Biden. And this was reported in the New York Times, is that the United States is quietly trying to work with the Saudi government to send Guantanamo detainees to their rehabilitation program in Riyadh and in Jeddah so that they can close Guantanamo. So that's
by the way, was promised to be closed during the Obama administration.
Exactly, Jamal. And they have no place to send these folks. And now they're begging MBS and the Saudi regime to take the Guantanamo detainees. So there's yet another way in which the United States is going to Saudi Arabia and MBS in a subservient position, needing something from them. And this whole power imbalance is changing dramatically, Jamal. And I'm afraid that as oil prices go up, the amount of submissiveness politically that the United States has to accept from Saudi Arabia will only increase. I think this is among the weakest positions the United States has had politically in relation to Saudi Arabia in a very long time. The U.S. government needs the Saudis more than the Saudis need the U.S. The Saudis are thumbing their nose at the U.S. They're doing deals with apartheid states. They're doing deals with, with basically warmongers in Russia. And it doesn't matter what Joe Biden or the United States says, Jamal. They're going to do what they want. So what do you call that? Is that really such a great ally that they're willing to do all that? Give me a break.
I mean, look at our allies and look at our situation. I mean, somehow we preach democracy, human rights, and we forge, friendship and allegiance and cooperation and collaboration with Saudi Arabia, because it has such a great human rights record, and then with apartheid Israel and defend Israel tooth and nail while they're slaughtering Palestinian children, American journalists, and so on. I mean, that's kind of my last expectations, is to kind of think about, unfortunately, Congress and this administration and the administration before it to do the right thing.
Yeah, Jamal. And by the way, just a little footnote that came up in I think it was the Jerusalem Post. Maybe you saw it, you could elaborate on it. But the air corridor between Saudi Arabia and Oman is opening up to the apartheid airline, El Al, and to Israeli airspace. So all these things are happening with these rogue apartheid oppressive regimes at a time when the Europeans and Americans are paying a price, literally and figuratively, for all of these, intense, increases in inflation, in the price of oil and gas, and because of this war and support that the United States has for these rogue regimes.
You're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. We got to talk about the story of the week, at least, I mean, that everybody's talking about on mainstream media, etc. These
who ratted on Trump, man? Who ratted on him?
Well, first of all these documents that Trump has in his house in Mar-a-Lago, and then all of a sudden, the FBI descended there carrying, 11 boxes or something like this?
No, 30 boxes, but
30 boxes.
11 boxes had top secret material.
Top secret. They knew exactly where to go, where to find them. They've been asking, supposedly, through his lawyer to get them, and he didn't. And now it's in their possession. But the question is, who ratted on Trump? Yes.
It's a really good question. And I might add, Jamal, just a little piece of detail. One of Trump's attorneys signed an affidavit telling the FBI and the DOJ that all of the records had been returned back to Washington, D.C. So his lawyer signed an affidavit, a statement basically that was untrue. Maybe this lawyer didn't know. Most likely he just lied and signed it to get the FBI off his case. The reason the FBI raided, in fact, was because there was, everyone believes, a mole, an informant somewhere very close to Trump, because some reporting has indicated, Jamal, there's only about 12 people, maybe 15 people that know about this residence, know about this storage area, and knew about the boxes and where they were. And, Jared Kushner, Ivana.
Well, according to his aunt, Trump's cousin. I guess she will be Ivana's aunt. She said, and I'm quoting here, she did that, this is another interview. She said, we need to start with who have access to this stuff. I don't think Mark Meadows would have access to it. This is Mary Trump. And then, of course, people forget, if they have forgotten, Mark Meadows is the former chief of staff who's the confidant and who should know everything. I think we need, and she continued to say, Jess, and this is something you'll like, I think we need to look very hard at why Jared got $2 billion. She's referencing the $2 billion he received from Qatar.
From UAE, from all these deals.
She said, I think we need to look very hard at why Jared got $2 billion, she said, right? She's referring to an investment into Kushner's private equity firm by a fund led, I'm sorry, actually led by Mohammed bin Salman, the crown, it was led by Mohammed bin Salman. And then when we need to look very hard at why he has been so quiet for so many months now, and we need to think about who could also be implicated in this, that would need a big, as big a play as turning Donald in order to get out of trouble, or at least to mitigate the trouble they're in. It sounds like somebody in Jared's position. I'm not saying it's Jared, but it could be. So it looks like Jared is distancing himself from Trump, and there might be an investigation on this investment, $2 billion investment, while he was still in office.
I think it's a very interesting hypothesis, Jamal.
And then I'm going to add, because, we don't want to sound like you and I are the conspiracy theorists. We're talking about Trump's cousin who's saying this.
Right.
And then his former attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen, and he also implicated Kushner. And he goes, it's definitely a member of his inner circle. This is according to Cohen. Would not be surprised to find out it is Jared or one of his children. Who else would know about, because you said that, who else would know about the existence of a safe and the specific content kept inside, according to Cohen? So his former lawyer, his cousin.
Right. But there's another question, Jamal, which is, who knew about it? But again, we come back to the classic question, who would potentially benefit? And I think the analysis on Jared Kushner being the rat, being the mole, being the informant to the FBI does in fact, and we're not saying it is, we're just saying a lot of different people, not us, and pieces of information implicate Jared or someone close, maybe his daughter, Jared's wife, Ivanka, we don't know. But certainly Jared Kushner has been quiet. And for Jared Kushner to be quiet after he got the $2 billion, after all of the scandals that have come forth, after his intimate relationship with the president throughout the 4 years of the Trump administration, the former president, I don't know, it smells kind of fishy to me, Jamal, that Jared would be so quiet and then all of a sudden they find the missing boxes. I don't know. It sounds plausible to me. What do you think?
Well, it is possible, because you mentioned if something illegal was done to acquire the $2 billion, take advantage of your position as a senior advisor to the president, all access to important information, and all of a sudden, hey, did anyone write you a check for $2 billion, Jess? Or
No,
how easy is it to get $2 billion?
No. And let's not forget that also Jared benefited because somebody bought his bankrupt building in Manhattan in New York City, and that was also purchased through Middle Eastern Gulf money to purchase this building that was going under. So it smells really fishy to me, Jamal. I don't know what you think.
I don't know. I mean, $2 billion, and then all of a sudden now Trump is thrown under the bus. A very small circle that knew about the whereabouts of these documents, the safe, and the other FBI has been investigating several of these people around Trump. So if they leaned on Jared, if they had enough incriminating evidence to say, well, let's cut a deal,
it makes sense to me.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. We're not, we're going to keep an open mind. We're going to follow the information and the data where it leads us. At this point, all we're doing is saying we heard from Mary Trump, we heard from, Michael Cohen, his former attorney, all kind of saying, I wonder if it's Jared. We're keeping an open mind. We're going to follow the data, but it sure smells fishy to me, Jamal.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco, 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows.
We'll see you next week.